There are moments when the quiet between you and him feels louder than any argument ever could. You know the kind of silence I'm talking about, the one that presses against your chest like an invisible weight, the silence that leaves you replaying every word you ever said, searching for the exact moment you became invisible to him. Maybe you've felt it late at night, when you stare at your phone and wonder if he ever cared at all. Or in the middle of the day, when something reminds you of his laughter, and you almost reach for him, only to remember he's not reaching back. That kind of silence has a way of echoing through old wounds, stirring up the hidden fear that you're somehow unworthy of being chosen, unworthy of being held, unworthy of being loved in the open light of day. Louise Hay once offered a simple truth: I am willing to release the need to feel unworthy. It sounds gentle, almost too simple, doesn't it? And yet, somewhere beneath the ache in your heart, you know there is a pattern that keeps pulling you back to men who disappear. You've been taught, quietly, persistently, that love must be earned through proving, through pleasing, through waiting. You were taught that if you just become good enough, patient enough, selfless enough, eventually he will look up and finally see you standing there. But the longer you wait, the deeper the doubt grows. The belief that maybe his silence means something about you, that it confirms every secret suspicion you've carried since you were a little girl, that you are too much, or not enough, or somehow both at the same time. And when you feel that hunger for acknowledgement, that trembling hope that a single message could soothe the raw edges of your loneliness, it can feel almost impossible to remember who you were before his absence defined your worth. It can feel like the most natural thing in the world to keep trying, to keep explaining, to keep reaching for someone who won't reach back. But there is another way. There is an older, wilder part of you that remembers she was never meant to beg for scraps of affection. Clarissa Pinkola Estes called her the wild woman, the one who walks into the dark forest not to be found, but to find herself again. The part of you who knows that love is not a test you have to pass, or a prize you have to earn. Perhaps this is the moment when you begin to see that his silence is not the final verdict on your worth. It is simply an invitation to meet yourself more honestly. An invitation to turn inward and ask why you have made his attention your oxygen. Why you have allowed someone else's indifference to become proof of your inadequacy. You are not inadequate. You are not broken. You are simply standing in the doorway between the girl who waits and the woman who chooses. The woman who understands that her dignity is worth more than any text, any breadcrumb, any fleeting promise. This is where your power begins. In the quiet acknowledgement that you are tired of performing for love, that you are done proving, done pleading, done sacrificing your peace to keep someone close who doesn't have the courage to meet you fully. In this space, you can begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that you abandoned for the sake of being chosen. You can begin to imagine what it might feel like to let go of the belief that love requires your suffering, to let go of the idea that silence is your punishment, to consider that perhaps silence can also be your sanctuary, your chance to remember that you are worthy of devotion simply because you breathe. And so, as we begin this journey together, let this be the promise you make to yourself, that you will no longer confuse being ignored with being unlovable, that you will no longer measure your value by the attention of someone who cannot see your light. This is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of a different kind of love, the love you offer to yourself when no one else shows up. The love that does not waver or disappear. The love that becomes the foundation for everything you will build from this moment on. There is a quiet shame that often hides beneath your need for his attention, a shame so familiar you hardly notice it anymore. It lives in the small moments you don't speak of, the way your stomach knots when you see he's online but not messaging you, the way you check your reflection before calling, as if the softness of your voice could make him stay. It's the secret belief that if you can just be the right version of yourself, if you can anticipate his moods, if you can say exactly what he wants to hear, maybe then he won't disappear again. Maybe then you'll finally feel safe in his gaze. But this hope is built on the same unsteady ground that has been with you since childhood. A time when you learned that love could be withdrawn without warning, that affection was conditional, that you had to earn your place in someone's heart. You felt it back then, didn't you? That flicker of panic when a parent was distracted or disappointed, that hollow ache when your feelings were too big, too inconvenient, too much for someone else to hold. And so you became skilled at scanning the room for signs you were about to lose the little bit of closeness you had. You learned to overfunction, to be agreeable, to twist yourself into whatever shape would keep you from being left behind. Even now, as a grown woman, that old fear still breathes under your skin. When he ignores you, it is not just this man's silence that wounds you. It is the echo of every time you were made to feel invisible, every time you were taught that your needs were an inconvenience. Sometimes you catch yourself wondering why you can't just let it go, why you can't be the woman who shrugs and moves on without looking back. But your heart was wired long ago to equate attention with survival. And so when he withholds it, your nervous system interprets it as danger. This is why you feel that desperation, that tightness in your chest, that urge to do anything, say anything, to make him notice you again. You are not weak for feeling this way. You are human. You are tender. You are someone who was taught that love must be chaste. But love is not a performance. It is not a transaction. It is not something you have to audition for over and over. If his presence in your life depends on you proving you are worthy, it will never be love that sustains you. It will only be the fear of abandonment, dressed up in the costume of longing. And longing can feel so much like love, can it? It can feel electric and important, almost holy in its intensity. But longing is not love. Longing is the ache of your younger self, still hoping someone will finally stay. Still hoping that if you are perfect enough, patient enough, compliant enough, you will be chosen. There is nothing in you that requires fixing to be worthy of devotion. There is no version of yourself you must become to earn the tenderness you crave. The very fact that you exist, breathing, feeling, hoping, is enough. Enough to be loved without conditions. Enough to be met without disappearing into the silence. Enough to be seen without performing. This is the secret shame, believing that you have to barter your soul for scraps of connection. But it was never true. Not then. Not now. And if you feel something softening inside you as you hear these words, if you sense a tiny flicker of relief in your chest, that is the part of you that knows you were never meant to live on crumbs. That is the part of you that remembers who you were before anyone taught you to doubt it. The part that is ready to come home to herself, again and again, no matter who stays or who goes. There is a moment, often just after the silence stretches too long, when you feel compelled to fill the space with words. You feel an urgency to explain yourself, to justify why you care so much, to convince him that your heart is worth holding gently. You rehearse your sentences in your mind, imagining the perfect combination of honesty and softness that might make him finally understand how much this hurts you. But the more you try to make him see, the more invisible you feel. It is as though every attempt to pull him closer pushes you further into the shadows of yourself. And in that desperation, something precious in you begins to shrink. You might not even notice when it happens. You think you are clarifying, when really you are trying to secure his reassurance. You think you are communicating, when really you are pleading for acknowledgement. And somewhere beneath all that striving is the small, trembling hope that if you can just say the right thing, he will stop drifting away. But each explanation is a quiet surrender of your own worth. Each attempt to make him care is an unspoken agreement that his opinion matters more than your peace, that his comfort is more important than your self-respect. Louise Hay once spoke a truth that lands softly, but carries enormous power. Approval is something I choose to give myself first. Let those words sink into the place that feels raw from all your over-explaining. Because when you choose to grant yourself your own approval, you no longer need to chase it from someone who is not willing or able to give it. You no longer need to bend yourself around his silences. You begin to see that explaining your value to someone is often a way of abandoning yourself. There is a deep fatigue that comes from this cycle of proving, a weariness that seeps into your bones when you spend your days measuring your words, your tone, your very presence in the hope of keeping someone close. You might tell yourself that if you don't try, you will lose him. But perhaps the truth is that the version of him you are trying so hard to hold on to was never fully here in the first place. Perhaps you are chasing a connection that exists only in your longing. It is not easy to step away from this pattern. It can feel like stepping off a cliff into nothingness. The mind will whisper that without his validation, you will disappear. That you will dissolve into some nameless emptiness without his recognition to tether you to this world. But you are not empty. You are not dissolving. You are rediscovering the quiet ground beneath your own feet. the place that was always yours to stand upon, the place where your worth does not require explanation or defense. And in this stillness, something else begins to grow, a sense of calm that is no longer dependent on his attention, a tenderness toward yourself that feels unfamiliar but true, a gentle knowing that when you stop over-explaining, you are not giving up on love. You are giving up on the illusion that love must be earned through exhaustion. You are making space for a different kind of connection, one that does not ask you to prove your humanity over and over. There is a kind of quiet strength that grows in you when you decide to become emotionally inaccessible, not as a punishment, but as an act of devotion to your own spirit. It does not mean you no longer feel. It does not mean you have turned cold or that you have stopped caring. It simply means you have chosen to stop abandoning yourself every time someone else pulls away. It means you have stopped offering the most tender parts of your heart to someone who does not show up with reverence. In this space of stillness, there is no desperation to be understood. There is no urgency to be chosen. There is only the steady presence of your own worth. At first, this will feel unfamiliar. You might mistake your stillness for indifference. You might worry that not reacting will make you appear detached or unloving. But there is a profound difference between shutting down and standing rooted in your own dignity. When you become emotionally inaccessible to someone's games, to their withholding, to their indifference, you are not closing your heart to love. You are closing the door to the ways you have been taught to betray yourself. You are learning to sit with the discomfort of not filling the silence with apologies or justifications. You are learning to trust that your presence does not require constant proving. Sometimes, when you no longer rush to explain or soothe or fix, the other person will begin to notice the emptiness your absence creates. They may feel confused or even unsettled because the old dance has been interrupted. The pattern that once kept them comfortable no longer works. And that is not your burden to carry. That is not your responsibility to repair. Your only task is to remain true to yourself, to remain anchored in the quiet knowing that you have always been whole. This is not a performance of detachment. It is a reclamation of the energy you once scattered in every direction, hoping someone would gather it up and hand it back to you as proof of your value. Now, you hold that energy close to your own heart, not as a wall, but as a sanctuary. You discover that you are not required to keep your heart perpetually open to those who do not know how to meet it with the same sincerity. You are allowed to choose discernment over longing. You are allowed to choose peace over chaos. In time, you may notice that the pull to react becomes softer, quieter, less insistent. You may find that you can sit in your own company without the ache of being unseen swallowing you whole. You may even sense a quiet pride in your chest, a recognition that you are becoming the woman who no longer confuses attention with love. And in this space, you will see more clearly that the power you once tried to borrow from his approval was always meant to live inside you. Now, as we continue, let us explore why silence, when held with intention, is often more potent than any words you could ever speak. There is something almost alchemical about the way silence can transform a connection. It is so easy to believe that more words will solve everything, that if you can just say the right thing or find the perfect explanation, you will finally understand what he risks losing. But there comes a moment when your words become a kind of background noise that even you can no longer hear clearly. They begin to dilute your truth, to soften the edges of your dignity until you forget why you were speaking in the first place. This is why silence is more potent than any argument, more honest than any plea, because silence is a mirror that no one can escape. It reflects back everything unspoken, every choice, every absence, every fracture in a bond that once felt secure. When you stop speaking into the void, something unexpected happens. You feel the emptiness of his absence more vividly. Yes, but you also feel the fullness of your own presence returning to you. The energy you once poured into convincing him of your worth begins to gather inside your chest like a quiet flame. It warms you from the inside out, reminding you that you do not have to shout to be heard. You do not have to explain your way into someone's conscience. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to hold your silence with reverence, to let it become a sanctuary where your heart can rest. You may worry that your silence will be misunderstood, that he will interpret it as punishment or indifference. But this is not about him. It has never been about him. This is about the way you choose to honor the parts of you that grew tired of performing for affection. This is about the space you create to hear your own voice again, without the distortion of trying to be enough for someone else. When you stop filling every gap with explanation, you begin to see more clearly what was always there, a dynamic that depended on your willingness to abandon yourself. In this space of quiet, clarity emerges. You start to recognize the difference between connection and attachment. You see that true intimacy does not require you to chase or plead. It does not ask you to prove your worth in the currency of constant reassurance. When you fall silent, you invite the truth to reveal itself. You invite him to confront his own avoidance, his own inability to meet you with the same devotion you have been offering. And if he cannot bear the mirror your silence holds up to him, that is his lesson to learn, not yours to soften. There is a particular kind of peace that comes when you realize you do not have to participate in every conversation, every conflict, every dance of proving and withdrawing. Sometimes, you can simply choose to be still, to trust that your absence speaks what your words no longer can, to trust that the woman you are becoming does not need to convince anyone of her worth. She simply is, and in that being, she becomes unshakable. And as you sit in this stillness, you may begin to sense another possibility, the art of disappearing with grace, not to punish or to manipulate, but to nourish the parts of you that are ready to remember who you were before you ever forgot. There is a tenderness in the way a woman chooses to disappear with grace. It is not a vanishing out of spite, or a quiet threat meant to provoke guilt. It is something far more sacred. It is the moment she understands that staying visible to someone who refuses to see her is the most painful kind of exile. And so she steps back, not to punish him, but to gather her own spirit, to sit with the parts of herself she abandoned while waiting to be chosen. This is the feminine art of disappearing without closing her heart. She does not slam the door. She does not hurl accusations into the air. She simply begins to walk away from a place that no longer honors her softness. In that quiet departure, she becomes something new, something ancient. Clarissa Pinkola Estes speaks of the woman who goes into the forest to remember herself. You may feel that image stirring in you now, a woman stepping into the trees, leaving behind the echo of his indifference, stepping toward something she cannot yet name but trusts all the same. There is a sacred loneliness in this path, a bittersweet relief that finally, no one else's needs are louder than your own. For the first time in so long, you hear yourself breathing again. You notice your own heartbeat, steady and true beneath your ribs. And you realize how long you have been holding your breath for someone who never asked you to exhale. This is not abandonment of love itself. It is a return to the source of love within you. It is a decision to choose your own soul over the small comfort of proximity to someone who will not meet you halfway. There will be days when this choice feels heavier than you expected. You may find yourself tempted to reach out, to shrink back into the old ache, to convince yourself that disappearing was a mistake. But when that longing arises, you can remember this. It is not him you miss. It is the illusion that one day, he would finally see you. It is the dream of being chosen without having to sacrifice the very heart that made you worthy in the first place. And in those moments of doubt, you can return to the simple truth that disappearing with grace does not make you cold or unfeeling. It makes you brave. It means you trust yourself enough to walk away without needing a final word or a dramatic exit. You trust that the forest will hold you in ways he never could. You trust that there is something on the other side of this absence, something truer, something softer, something real. As you keep walking, step by step, you may begin to notice that the world feels different without the weight of his silence pressing on your spirit. You may find that you are less concerned with how he interprets your absence, and more interested in what it feels like to simply belong to yourself. And in that belonging, you discover a kind of freedom that no one can give you, the freedom to be exactly who you are, without apology, the freedom to love yourself more fiercely than you ever thought possible. When you are ready, we will move into what it looks like to hold your standards, without the noise of drama or the fear of losing someone who was never truly yours. There is a calm power that comes when you realize your standards are not something you need to shout about or defend. They are not ultimatums. They are not punishments. They are simply the quiet declarations of what your heart can no longer compromise. When you hold your standards without drama, you are no longer trying to control how he sees you. You are no longer rehearsing your worth in the hope that he will finally decide you are enough. You are simply standing in the clear, steady, knowing that access to your life is not a given. It is a privilege that must be earned through consistency, through care, through presence. This does not mean you never feel the ache of disappointment when someone fails to rise to meet you. You will still feel it in your chest, like a dull bruise that reminds you how much you wanted to believe in the story you were writing together. But there is a difference between feeling your sadness and abandoning your standards to keep the illusion alive. The woman you are becoming does not shrink herself to avoid discomfort. She does not trade her peace for the fantasy of being chosen. She does not barter her boundaries for a few fleeting moments of closeness. When you hold your standards with calm, you are not issuing threats or playing games. You are simply living in alignment with your deepest truths. You are saying, without saying, that your heart is sacred ground, that you will not invite someone to walk there if they cannot tread with respect. And in that choice, you teach him something profound, not through accusation or argument, but through your unwavering example. You teach him that you are not afraid of your own solitude. You teach him that your love is a gift, not an entitlement. There will be moments when this kind of quiet strength feels almost unbearable, when you long to drop your standards, just for a little while, to feel the warmth of his attention again. You may feel tempted to convince yourself that lowering the bar will ease the loneliness, but you know in your bones that the cost of betraying yourself is too high. You have paid that price before. You have felt the hollow emptiness of staying where you were not cherished, and this time, you choose differently. Your calm withdrawal does not need to be loud to be powerful. It does not need to be accompanied by declarations or demands. Sometimes, the most transformative act is simply to step back without fanfare, to let your absence speak where your words cannot, because in that space, he is left to confront the truth of his own choices. And whether or not he chooses to rise, you have already claimed something priceless: the freedom to belong fully to yourself. This is where the real alchemy begins. When you stop trying to hold together what was never meant to last, your heart has room to heal, and in that healing, you find a clarity that once felt impossible. A clarity that says, I will not abandon myself for the sake of belonging to someone who does not know how to meet me here. As this understanding settles into your body, you may feel the stirring of a new question. What would it look like to replace the urge to prove yourself with a deeper kind of inner stillness? We will explore that together in the next part. There is a moment, often quiet and almost imperceptible, when you feel the familiar urge rising in your chest. The urge to reach for your phone, to compose another message, to explain one more time why you deserve tenderness. It feels so reasonable, so necessary, this compulsion to prove your worth. But beneath that urgency is something softer and far more honest. A fear that if you do not remind him of your value, he will forget it. And if he forgets it, maybe it means it was never real. That is the part of you that still believes love is something to be won by persistence, by argument, by endless vulnerability offered without reciprocity. The urge to prove yourself is a habit that was born long before this man entered your life. It is the echo of all the times you felt invisible, all the moments you were made to question your belonging. When that feeling surfaces, it can seem almost impossible to sit still. Your body hums with the need to do something, to say something, to make the discomfort stop. But what if that discomfort is not something to be fixed? What if it is simply the place where your truest healing begins? Because the more you practice meeting that urge with stillness, the more you discover that your worth does not depend on someone else's recognition. Louise Hay spoke words that carry a quiet authority. I approve of myself. That is enough. Let yourself hear that again, in the place where your heart feels most raw. I approve of myself. That is enough. It is not an idea to recite mindlessly. It is an invitation to become intimate with the parts of you that have been waiting for permission to rest. The parts that are exhausted from trying to be everything to everyone. The parts that never learned they were already whole. When you replace the compulsion to prove with inner stillness, you begin to notice that your energy returns to you. The energy you once scattered in search of validation starts to gather in your chest, warm and steady like a small flame. You realize you do not need to perform your pain for someone else to legitimize it. You do not need to narrate your worth to someone who cannot meet you in your fullness. And you certainly do not need to collapse your boundaries for the chance to be temporarily reassured. This kind of stillness is not passive. It is not a resignation. It is an act of profound courage. To sit with the ache and choose not to abandon yourself is one of the bravest things you will ever do. In that space, you may find that the fear begins to soften, the tightness in your chest loosens, and in its place grows a deeper knowing. You are not here to convince anyone of your value. You are here to embody it. And when that embodiment becomes your resting place, rather than your destination, something shifts in the way you relate to everyone around you. You begin to trust that those who are meant to meet you will feel your steadiness and respond with their own, and those who cannot will drift away, not as a loss, but as a clearing that makes space for the love you have always deserved. As we continue, let's turn to what happens when you finally disengage from the games you never consented to play, and how that simple act creates a ripple effect more powerful than any confrontation ever could. There is a quiet revolution that begins the moment you decide to disengage from the games you never agreed to play. It does not happen with a grand declaration or a final word designed to wound. It happens in the stillness of your own heart, when you realize you no longer have to participate in cycles that deplete your spirit. You no longer have to measure your worth by how quickly he responds or how consistently he shows up. You no longer have to contort yourself into the shape of someone who is always available to be taken for granted. In this choice to detach, you are not abandoning love. You are abandoning the illusion that love must be earned through self-sacrifice. At first, you may feel the ache of that absence more vividly than you imagined. The space where his attention used to be might feel like an exposed nerve. Your mind may whisper that if you stop engaging, he will never come back, that your silence will push him further away. But what if the truth is simpler and more liberating? What if your disengagement is not about whether he returns, but about whether you finally return to yourself? Because when you no longer invest your energy in proving, explaining, or tolerating, you free yourself from the exhausting task of managing someone else's comfort. And something unexpected happens in that space. Your absence becomes a mirror he cannot look away from, where once you filled every gap with your care, your questions, your offerings of understanding, now there is only stillness. That stillness reflects back the truth of his own actions, or his own inability to show up fully. And in that reflection, he may feel the emptiness his indifference has created. He may feel the cost of what he once took for granted. But whether he recognizes that cost is no longer your concern, your focus has shifted inward, to the tender work of reclaiming the parts of yourself you abandoned in the name of love. When you disengage, you are not closing your heart. You are simply closing the door to dynamics that do not honor you. You are choosing to stand on ground that feels solid, rather than the shifting sands of conditional affection. And you may notice that your body responds with a kind of relief you haven't felt in years. The tightness in your chest begins to ease. The restlessness that once kept you awake at night starts to quiet. You realize that your worth was never tied to whether someone chose to show up consistently. It was always yours. This is the ripple effect of your detachment. When you refuse to play the game loses its hold over you. When you stop chasing, the energy you once gave away so freely returns to nourish your own spirit. And in that nourishment, you discover that you do not need anyone to validate your decision. You do not need anyone to tell you that you did the right thing. You can feel it in your bones. You can feel it in the ease that begins to settle in your breath. Perhaps the most beautiful part of this shift is that when you no longer need to be rescued, you become free to love without desperation. You become free to let people rise to meet you, or to let them go if they cannot. Because you have already chosen the one relationship that matters more than any other, the relationship you have with yourself. And as this understanding deepens, you may begin to wonder what it would feel like to gather back every fragment of energy you ever left behind, to call it all home, and to feel, maybe for the first time, that you are whole. Let us move now into the ritual of reclaiming your energy, an intimate, sacred practice of coming back to yourself. There is a kind of homecoming that happens when you choose to reclaim your energy, a quiet gathering of every fragment you ever scattered in the name of love. It does not require an audience. It does not require an apology. It is a ritual meant only for you, a moment when you decide that every piece of your spirit deserves to belong to you again. You may feel hesitant as you begin, as though you are trespassing on some forbidden territory. But this territory has always been yours. You have simply forgotten how it feels to stand in the center of your own life, unburdened by the need to be chosen by someone else. When you sit in stillness, You might notice that your body remembers the places where you gave yourself away, the times you said yes when you meant no, the nights you waited for a message that never came, the hours you spent explaining, justifying, hoping he would finally understand the magnitude of your heart. And as you breathe into those memories, you can begin to call them home. You can whisper to each moment of self-abandonment, "It is safe to return now." You can let the energy you once poured into proving your worth flow back into your chest, warm and golden, like a promise you are finally ready to keep. In this ritual, you do not need elaborate words. You do not need to make sense of every regret or every sorrow. All you need is the willingness to sit with yourself, to feel the gravity of your own presence. You can close your eyes if it helps, or place a hand over your heart as a gesture of remembrance. And as you rest there, you can imagine every piece of yourself, every hope, every tenderness, every silent prayer, finding its way back to you. You can feel the way your body softens, as you realize you are no longer searching for someone to complete you. You were never incomplete. And in that space of reunion, a simple truth begins to take root. You are the prize. You are the sanctuary. You are the love you have been waiting for. No amount of someone else's attention can replace the steadiness of belonging to yourself. No absence can eclipse the light that lives inside you. When you whisper to your own heart, "I am the prize. My silence is my sanctuary," you are not declaring war on anyone. You are ending the war within yourself. You are choosing peace over longing. You are choosing self-respect over the illusion of safety that came from being needed by someone who could not hold your depth. As you sit in this quiet completion, you may notice that something has shifted in the way you carry yourself. You are no longer reaching. You are no longer performing. You are simply here, anchored in the truth that you are worthy, not because someone else says so, but because you have decided it is true. And from this place, every choice you make will be different. Every relationship will feel different, because you will no longer settle for the smallness of being almost seen, almost loved, almost chosen. In this stillness, there is nothing left to chase. There is only the quiet certainty that you have come home to yourself, and that is enough. When you are ready, we will step into the closing reflections of this journey, a final blessing for your heart, as you walk forward with new clarity and devotion. There is a soft exhale waiting for you at the end of this journey, a moment when you understand in your bones that you were never meant to keep proving your worth to someone who could not recognize it. Louise Hay offers words that feel like a balm on old wounds. "I am willing to release the pattern in my consciousness that created this experience." Let those words settle in the place where your heart has felt tired of trying, tired of waiting, tired of becoming smaller so that someone else could feel comfortable. You do not have to carry the weight of his silence anymore. You do not have to keep asking what you did wrong, because maybe you did nothing wrong. Maybe you were simply learning how to remember your own value, no matter who failed to honor it. When you choose to stop making his attention your oxygen, you do something radical and tender. You reclaim the life that was always yours to live. You begin to see that love does not require you to shrink, or to beg, or to lose yourself in the hunger to be wanted. You begin to feel the quiet power of standing in your own light, without apology. Clarissa Pinkola Estes reminds us that the wild feminine does not wait to be chosen. She chooses herself first. She does not linger in doorways where she is not welcomed. She does not hand her spirit over to those who cannot hold it gently. She gathers her courage, and she walks into the unknown with her head held high, trusting that her own heart will be enough company. And so perhaps this is the moment you become the lighthouse instead of the lantern. The lighthouse does not chase the ships. It does not lower itself to be easier to reach. It stands tall and bright, knowing that those who are meant to find it will find it. Those who are meant to meet you in your wholeness will feel the pull of your light. Those who cannot will drift away into their own darkness. And that is not your burden to bear. You are not here to convince anyone that you are worthy of devotion. You are here to embody that devotion within yourself, to remember that you are the prize. You are the sanctuary. You are the love that does not vanish when someone else becomes silent. You are the one you have been waiting for, and you always have been. If these words have touched something inside you, if you feel the small flicker of recognition that you are ready to live this truth more fully, you are not alone. There is an entire community of women walking the same path, learning to trade desperation for peace, fear for clarity, longing for self-respect. And together, we create a new story about what it means to love without losing ourselves. Before you go, you are invited to stay connected. You can subscribe to this channel if you feel called to receive more reflections like this, gentle reminders that your worth is unshakable. And if your heart feels ready to keep exploring, there is another video waiting for you right here on the screen, a continuation of this conversation, a place to keep nourishing the woman you are becoming. Because this is not the end. It is simply the beginning of a life where your love belongs first to you, a life where your silence is not your prison, it is your power.